You can have my answer now if you like. My offer is this. Nothing. Not even the fee for the gaming license, which I would appreciate if you would put up personally.
The Godfather 2 had the colossal task of living up to one of the greatest gangster films ever made, and somehow, someway, it managed to deliver and debatably outdo the first. In this video we're going to take a deep dive into the legacy of the movie, how it came about, and why it still resonates as a cinematic masterpiece to this day. Following the huge success of the first movie, Paramount were keen to develop a follow-up, and many of the cast and crew were set to return. Mario Puzo actually began writing a script for The Godfather 2 in December of 1971, before the first film was even released, with its original title being The Death of Michael Corleone. Sounds too much like a Halloween film for me. Francis Ford Coppola met with a young Martin Scorsese, basically begging him to take The Godfather 2 off his hands and direct it, since the first film had been such a stressful experience for him. Paramount refused and insisted the man they had mentally tortured on The Godfather return to direct the second. Coppola really was in an abusive relationship with Paramount back here, wasn't he? Poor guy. Coppola's idea for the sequel was to juxtapose the ascension of the family under Vito Corleone with the decline of the family under his son Michael. He was very intrigued to write a screenplay about both father and son at the same age, cutting back and forth between the different timelines. In order to smooth things over with him, Paramount sent Coppola a Mercedes-Benz 600 limousine as a reward for the record success of The Godfather, and as an incentive to direct the sequel. He agreed as long as they allowed him to direct his own script, The Conversation, which went on to be released later in 1974. He also insisted he was given the screenplay duties for The Great Gatsby, also released in 74. Marlon Brando was offered to return for a flashback sequence, however the actor felt he had been disrespected by Paramount when making The Godfather, and he failed to show up, forcing the script to be rewritten so an older Vito Corleone was not in it. To add insult to injury, early on Al Pacino's lawyers contacted Coppola to advise he had strong issues with the script, and believe it or not would not be returning as Michael Corleone. Coppola frantically spent an entire evening rewriting the script to make the actor happy, and due to this Pacino changed his mind and agreed to return for the sequel. Everyone was just horrible to Francis Ford Coppola making these films, weren't they? Not only does he have to deal with Paramount screwing around every 5 minutes, even his own allies like Al Pacino were putting him through hell. Al Pacino, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed.
Give me all you got! Give me all you got!
James Caan returned to reprise the role of Sonny in a flashback sequence, but he demanded he be paid the same amount he was in the entire previous film for the single scene in part 2. And believe it or not, Paramount accepted. I'll be honest, you can never predict what they were going to do in regard to these films. One minute they won't do anything, the next they offer an actor literally everything. Fresh off his breakout role in Mean Streets a year earlier, a 30-year-old Robert De Niro was offered the part of a young Vito Corleone. Since almost every line that Vito speaks in the film was to be Sicilian, De Niro spent 4 months learning to speak the Sicilian dialect of Italian in order to make his performance as authentic as possible.
One thing we were trying in Sicily when I was older, Brando had something in his mouth and I went to the same dentist and just got a smaller one. And I tried to get a little heavier for that period because he was a little older and a little mature and so on. And so one of the things we were trying to decide was about the mustache. The way I remember this, I said, well, why don't we flip a coin? And just flipped a coin, and heads it's on, tails it's off, and so it was heads, I guess.
Coppola said the shoot ran very smoothly despite being a more intricate story than the first film and needing multiple locations for the two narratives. The film spread out its filming all the way from California, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Sicily. Believe it or not, early critic screenings deemed The Godfather 2 a disaster, judging the cross-cutting between Vito and Michael's lives to be too frequent to leave a lasting impression. Coppola returned to the editing room but didn't have enough time to complete another edit, and so the film stayed as it was. Thank God, I say. The Godfather 2 premiered in New York City on December 12, 1974 and was released in the United States on December 20th. Part 2 could not surpass the first Godfather commercially, grossing $47.5 million in the USA and Canada. However, it was still Paramount's highest grossing film of 1974 and the 7th highest grossing film in the United States. Eventually The Godfather 2 accumulated $93 million worldwide on its budget of $13 million. So the movie was still a huge success, although the gross did pale in comparison to The Godfather's global take-home of $270 million. It's so crazy to think The Godfather Part 2 initially received a bad reception, but it really did. What were these critics thinking? Vincent Canby of the New York Times called the film stitched together, moving in fits and starts with no mind of its own. Wow. Stanley Kaufman, a critic for the New Republic, called the film full of gaps, and William Peacher of Commentary wrote that the film was overly deliberate and that he knew of no one who was a casual moviegoer who would like Part 2 as much as Part 1. Even good old Roger Ebert didn't give The Godfather 2 a great review initially, saying Coppola was constantly guilty of breaking the tension through the chronological shifts. His counterpart Gene Siskel awarded the movie 3.5 out of 4, writing that it was at times beautiful and exciting, sometimes just as much as the original, but that sequels could never be the same. Siskel described The Godfather Part 2 as being forced to go to a funeral the second time. The tears just don't flow as easily. Eventually The Godfather 2 became the subject of quite a stringent critical re-evaluation, and of course it's now viewed as one of the greatest films ever made, with some viewing it as better than the original. This young man who started off in the first film never wanting to go into the family business is now chained to the Corleone empire, and the question ends up being how far will he go to maintain power, and at what cost to his humanity. Michael has decided to discard his own values to do the right thing by his family, but The Godfather 2 examines the idea that by doing this, he's actually ended up possibly dooming the empire, because he's become desperate and fragile and will do anything. Michael perhaps didn't fully realise the inherent corruption and dangers around every corner as he attempts to navigate the treacherous waters of the world of crime. He never realised that the family he went into the business to protect could end up being a target, and that ends up happening in the chilling moment when Michael orders the hit on his brother Frito.
There's a plane waiting for us to take us to Miami in an hour, all right? Don't make a big thing about it. I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart.
That moment is so powerful and raw because it lays bare the themes of betrayal and the devastating effects of power, and how what Michael was attempting to protect and control all along has slipped through his fingers. Michael changes throughout The Godfather 2, but perhaps not consciously. His actions alter him, his choices define him, and it's a great example of how the crime lifestyle is sometimes essentially a case of sleepwalking through horrific decisions, because if you ever truly deliberated over them, you would actually realise what you were doing, and the severity of it. Once Michael has crossed the line and made several of these choices that the regular person would find incredibly immoral, he's a changed man. But what is so interesting is that the old Michael and his old morals are still lurking underneath, buried all the way down, because he didn't actually change through long measured decisions. He just does things because it's the only way you can operate in that world. So one of the big themes is that the ghost of the old Michael Corleone is still whispering in his ear, as well as the spectre of his father looming over proceedings. And whenever we are taken back to his timeline, we are reminded that things did used to be a bit different, but that ultimately Michael and where Michael ends up is a result of the decisions Vito made in the past. Interestingly, The Godfather 2 shifts the roles, and we are transported back to Vito's earlier life, where he is wide-eyed and, dare I say it, a bit innocent, building his empire from the ground up through hard work. Vito is perhaps the more moral actor when you examine the two timelines in The Godfather 2, but ultimately Michael is the end result of his empire. Yes, he might have built it up somewhat morally, but at the end of the day, Michael's fate is the dark side of that dream. Vito's ambition is what led to isolation and despair for his son. Both these timelines running alongside each other is so well done. It drives home the idea of the past affecting the future, how we are all in some way chained to the choices our past family members made, and that different time periods needed to be navigated in different ways. The whole thing is such a beautiful, rich tapestry of storytelling. Coppola didn't want to just retell the story, he wanted to evolve it, and give the Godfather legacy a deeper dimension. The parallel narrative is ambitious and compelling. It was one of the most unique filmmaking choices in history when The Godfather 2 was released, and perhaps that's why it rubbed some critics the wrong way when they first saw it. Few filmmakers have so skillfully switched between timelines as Coppola in The Godfather 2. Every moment is so meticulously selected to relate to the entire saga, and it's one of the most novelistic films ever made, and I miss films like this. epics that are slow burning and uncompromising. In today's short attention span world, movies like this are being forgotten. I just hope there are at least a few filmmakers out there who are keen to keep this style alive. Much like in the first Godfather, Coppola and his cinematographer are once again fascinated with lighting, this time casting many shadows on Michael's face, symbolising the darkness creeping into his soul. In the first film, it was Vito who would be sat in the dimly lit room with the shadows hitting him, and now it's Michael. He has become Vito. Sorry Michael, you became your father. The very thing we all dread. It's just extra bad because your father was a ruthless mob boss, so sorry mate. One of the most iconic moments in The Godfather that shows the old Michael is pretty much gone is that devastating scene when Michael gives his brother the kiss of death. It hits incredibly hard. It's one of the most powerful moments in the franchise as Michael decides nothing is off limits. The harsh truth that Michael must now face is that not even his family is safe, even from him. This scene is chilling, emotional, unforgettable, a true testament to the film's ability to evoke such strong feelings. You feel sorry for Michael getting to this point, but dear God, you also fear him, because he doesn't hold back and does what he believes needs to be done. The actual murder takes place at Lake Tahoe in a truly gripping, nihilistic and dismal scene. The music is haunting and it's one of the most dark moments of the film and the entire franchise. Coppola drives home the feeling that things have changed forever for Michael and his family. Fredo is a tragic character. He indeed betrayed Michael, but didn't deserve it to end this way. And the fact it did shows us Michael has lost all patience and his sense of humanity. The scene ends with Michael alone, staring out at sea. This is perhaps one of the most disturbing and stark images ever in film. He looks almost demonic looking out, alone and isolated, showing only a moment of remorse as he looks down. Perhaps it wasn't just Fredo who died that day, but Michael too. Let's talk about some of the great scenes from the Vito timeline. When Coppola takes us back to Vito's timeline and shows him taking control of the family business through cunning and strategic moves, he contrasts this with Michael's increasing isolation many years in the future. You can really feel the weight of the family legacy bearing down on Michael. And it's fascinating to see Pacino play such a cold character when he commonly has unleashed wild performances ever since. They are amazing too, obviously, but to go back and see Pacino quite frankly scary in moments because he's so ice cold and stern is a real joy. This guy is truly one of the greatest actors of all time.
I don't want you near my house. When you see our mother, I want to know a day in advance so I won't be there. You're nothing to me now.
Robert De Niro faced a huge challenge stepping into the role of young Vito Corleone. The character was made legendary by Brando's unforgettable performance in the first Godfather. De Niro had to find a way of honouring what Brando created while also making the character his own. Boy does he pull it off. The fact he's playing a younger Vito helped, as De Niro was able to key into Vito's vulnerability while only having to provide hints of the ruthless leader he will become. De Niro proved right away that he was a master of conveying a world of emotions without having to say a word. When he does speak, he's timid and soft, and then suddenly there are brief moments where that fierce ambition comes out. It's like you can feel the future Vito being slowly but surely formed deep down inside of him.
Lasciati fare a me. I take everything. Io ho risetto tutte cose. E ho bisogno di un nemico mai alla miscimeci, no?
Ma come fai tu a farci pigliare da me?
Auguriamoci come mi interessa. Ma solo ricordatevi che vi feci un piacere.
His performance has such depth and emotion, and it doesn't take away from Marlon Brando in the first film. Instead, it actually enhances that and makes us even more fascinated with Vito. Vito shows he's able to think ahead and see the bigger picture, instead of focusing on the immediate threat. He shows that he's developing from a young immigrant unsure of himself to a cunning leader. Let's wrap things up by talking about another fantastic moment, the murder scene of Don Fenucci. A truly pivotal and life-changing moment for Vito. Fenucci, played by Gaston Moschin, is a significant obstacle in Vito's path. The 1920s setting is crucial here. It's a time of prohibition where organised crime is booming and the streets are filled with tension and betrayal. Fenucci represents the old guard of the mafia, while Vito symbolises a new, vibrant and different approach. It's a generational confrontation and a sign of the times that change is coming. The murder scene itself is a masterpiece of cinematic technique. There's a real tension as we watch Vito preparing for the confrontation, sitting alone, waiting for his destiny. The camera angles show the power dynamics at play. Vito walks through the dark, dimly lit corridors and eventually meets Fenucci at his doorway. The yellow tint as the murder is committed is so striking and creates a sense of heat and pressure and focus, like, look what's going on here, we're going to light it up for you, we're going to illuminate it. The music is perfect too, the score swells and heightens the suspense. We're left realising this isn't just a murder, it's a transformation for Vito as he makes a definitive statement. For me, this is one of the most well done murder scenes in all of cinema, and it's so simple and understated, but it does everything it needs to. It's a perfect display of how Coppola doesn't need a crazy setting or lots of action to create a scene you will never forget. They are both masterpieces, but which one do you guys prefer, The Godfather or The Godfather 2? Let me know in the comments below, and please consider subscribing. I will be covering The Godfather Part 3 very soon.